If you go to Moscow today, you see this incredible contrast. On one side, you've got these gleaming new skyscrapers, a really confident symbol of the new Russia. But then you look over and boom, there it is, the old Soviet Red Star still glowing over the Kremlin. It's this perfect picture of a legacy that's, well, it's complicated, to say the least. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into right now.
I mean, think about it. The collapse of the Soviet Union was something the world had never seen before. A superpower didn't lose a war, it just dissolved. And in its place, 15 new countries, all suddenly trying to figure out who they were and where they fit in. So after 3 decades, what's the real inheritance of that massive event?
And to really get this, we have to talk about scale. We're talking about 280 million people. That is a huge number. This wasn't just some country. It was a behemoth that covered 1/6 of the entire planet's landmass. So when something that huge falls apart, you just know the fallout is going to be massive and messy.
Which brings us to our first big theme. The end of the Soviet Union didn't just magically fix old problems. Nope. In a lot of places, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire, reigniting these old conflicts that the state's iron fist had been sitting on for decades. A really tragic example of this is the fight over Nagorno-Karabakh. It's this long, bitter dispute between Armenia and Azerbaijan that goes way back to Soviet times, but the collapse just unleashed all this fresh violence. Today, you've got this super fragile ceasefire with Russian peacekeepers on the ground, a constant, tense reminder that this wound is nowhere near healed.
And this quote from an Armenian soldier, Arvid Avanesyan, just cuts right through all the politics. He says, living alongside such an enemy is no longer possible. For the people who actually live there, peace feels more distant than ever. He says the joy and sparkle in people's eyes has disappeared. It's just a brutal reminder of the real human cost of these old wounds.
And of course, this isn't just a local fight anymore. It's pulled in bigger players. You've got Turkey backing Azerbaijan, France siding with Armenia, and Russia trying to walk this tightrope in the middle, playing peacemaker while juggling its own interests. The power vacuum the Soviets left behind didn't bring peace. It just created a new chessboard for everyone else.
But it's not all conflict zones. Actually, the 15 new states just shot off in wildly different directions. Some of them made a mad dash for the West, while others, well, they found it was almost impossible to escape Moscow's orbit. And this created 2 totally different kinds of futures.
This table really lays it all out, side by side. On one side, you've got a place like Lithuania. They went all in with the West, joined the EU, joined NATO. Their economy's been growing pretty steadily. But here's their big problem now, a brain drain, with young people heading for other parts of Europe. Now, flip over to Kyrgyzstan. Totally different story. They're still very much in Russia's orbit. Their whole economy kind of relies on workers sending money back home from Russia. It's just wild, right? Same starting point, 2 completely different destinations.
So the main thing to get here is that there's no one post-Soviet story. Think about it. The entire empire was built like a hub-and-spoke model. All the roads, pipelines, power lines, everything led to Moscow. So for these new countries, cutting those ties was a massive, massive undertaking. Some pulled it off, but others found they were just as stuck as they were before 1991.
Okay, so we've looked at the other republics, but what about the heart of the old empire, Russia itself? Well, for Moscow, the collapse was anything but a story of liberation. It was a national trauma, a deep humiliation that has been fueling this intense drive to get its great power status back ever since.
And this number? It's just staggering. 25 million. Overnight, 25 million ethnic Russians woke up and suddenly found themselves living in a foreign country. Their whole world changed, but they hadn't moved an inch. And in many of these new countries, they were treated like second-class citizens, which created this really deep and lasting sense of grievance. And you've probably heard this famous quote from Vladimir Putin. It just perfectly sums up how the Kremlin saw it. For them, this wasn't some victory for freedom. It was a self-inflicted disaster that tore a great nation to pieces and left millions of its people stranded.
So how did Russia react to this so-called catastrophe? Well, this chart spells out their priorities pretty clearly. You can see they poured a ton of money and effort into rebuilding their military, and they've absolutely achieved superpower status there. But look at the other bars. The economy? It's really only a regional power. And technology? Still lagging way behind. And that focus on the military comes at a huge cost back home. The country has been chronically underinvesting in itself. One expert called it an embarrassment that a country that massive still only has one modern highway.
All the money has been going to project power out in the world, not to build things up at home.
So all of this leads to a legacy that isn't just about politics or economics. It's deeply psychological. I mean, the attitudes and the survival tricks that people learned over 70 years of Soviet rule, they didn't just vanish in 1991.
This is such a key idea for understanding the mindset, Homo Sovieticus. It's this term for the Soviet person, the person who learned how to get by, how to lie to the state, how to put up with its crazy rules, how to pretend to be loyal, all while just trying to look out for yourself. That way of thinking is still deeply embedded in the culture and politics today. And you can't forget what happened right after the collapse. The 90s were a time of so-called shock therapy for the economy. But for regular people, it just meant chaos. Inflation went through the roof, corruption was everywhere, and their standard of living just collapsed. So the word democracy started to sound less like freedom and more like poverty and disorder, which made a lot of people yearn for a strong leader to come back and fix things.
Which brings us right back to that big question we started with. Was the collapse a catastrophe that should be mourned? Or was it this incredible opportunity that some countries grabbed and others just missed? And the truth, after all this time, is that it's both. It really just depends on where you were standing when that red flag finally came down.
You know, there's this one saying that I think just nails this whole thing perfectly. Anyone who doesn't mourn the Soviet Union has no heart. But anyone who would go back to what it was has no head. And that's it, right? The heart part, that's the nostalgia for a time of stability, of knowing your place. But the head part, that's remembering the reality, the repression, the stagnation. And 30 years on, that's still the tightrope everyone in the post-Soviet world is walking. It's this really tough, really painful space between the heart and the head.